Hi everyone, you are watching OBN. My guest today is Prof.Migai Akech. He teaches at the University of Nairobi. He is also a lawyer. Thank you for joining me, Professor.
Thank you very much, Jesse.
Tell us a little bit about your profile.
I am an academic specializing in constitutional law, administrative law, and I'm also an international trade lawyer. And I practice law based in Nairobi, Kenya. I teach at the University of Nairobi as well.
In this program, we are going to discuss about African issues.
Yes.
What is the status of Africa in terms of unity, solidarity, and self-independence?
In terms of the Africa's quest for unity, we go back to the origins of the Pan-African movement, and you go back to the early 20th century when people like Marcus Garvey, W.E.B. Du Bois were trying to unite African populations all over the world, whether present in Africa or in the diaspora. And it is those dreams of the founders, so to speak, if you can call people like Garvey and Du Bois as founders. It is their dreams that culminated in the formation of the Organization for African Unity under the leadership of the likes of Haile Selassie, Kwame Nkrumah, Kenneth Kaunda, Jomo Kenyatta, and the other founders.
Does this Pan-Africanism exist in reality?
Very much alive. In fact, I would say that it is more alive today than probably the decades of the 70s and the 80s, particularly with the formation of the African Union in 2000 and the whole movement towards African Renaissance led by the likes of Thabo Mbeki, the establishment of new institutions, particularly the NEPAD, the New Partnership for African Development, that has since been transformed into the Development Agency of the AU, and the African peer review mechanisms, in which I had the privilege of working for 3 years. So I would say that Pan-Africanism is very much alive, and also with a change of approach in terms of, if you recall, the OAU adopted a non-interference approach, whereas the African Union is saying that it will not be indifferent to abuses of human rights in its member states. And also that has culminated now in the establishment of the African Continental Free Trade Area. And in many respects, you see efforts to strengthen the regional economic communities so that they work better with the African Union. If you recall, 2 or 3 years ago, the African Union chairperson, then President Paul Kagame of Rwanda, initiated some reforms. And part of those reforms has seen the regional economic communities and the African Union Commission working better together. There's even now a special summit that brings together the two entities. So I would say that Pan-Africanism is very, very much alive, and we're getting better.
Challenges still remain to unite Africa. What is the challenge to unite Africa?
The challenge for me, there are a number of challenges. One has to do with the implementation of the non-indifference principle, in the sense that we need to see better efforts by the African Union as an entity, the African Union Commission, the member states, giving meaning to the idea of non-indifference. If you look at the resolution of conflicts across the continent, whereas we say that we will no longer tolerate human rights abuses, in some ways, these various bodies, the AUC, the union itself, the member states, have in some respects been slow to act, or slower than they ought to have done. So you expect that there'll be faster intervention when there are problems. So that the idea of African solutions to African problems must be implemented in a way that resonates with the ordinary citizen. Again, part of what the Paul Kagame initiative recognized is that the AU as an institution is a little removed from the African citizens. So there's a need for the African citizens to see that the union is more relevant to their day-to-day problems, so that when the conflict, we want to be able to see the African Union intervening and doing so in a timely manner.
Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed is promoting a Pan-Africanism agenda, but Westerners do not want to see African leaders to promote this grand continental agenda. Why?
In many ways, the West has benefited from exploiting and dividing Africa. And the only reason that that will change is if Africa unites, if we look inward in terms of funding our institutions. And in this respect, again, we need to note that there have been efforts to ensure that the member states of the African Union fund the activities of the Union, so that it is less dependent on external resources, and actually in the long term that it weans itself dependence on the West. So certainly, and also because of neocolonialism in some respects, the West continues to exploit and divide Africa and benefit from its resources. The Democratic Republic of Congo is a perfect example of this phenomenon. Sorry. So we have arguably the richest country in the world, but its people are some of the poorest, yet it has such immense resources. And yet it cannot get out of war as well. So these are some of the things that we are seeing leaders like Abiy trying to address, and which is why the African Union needs to come together and speak with one voice on a lot of these issues.
How do you see the relation between African countries and other countries outside of this continent?
Relations, I think you need to look at it from different lenses. So there are there is the colonial lens, in the sense that many African states were colonized by different European forces, and they've continued relationships with the colonial masters. The Commonwealth, for example, as an institution, is one such relationship that continues. But then you also have to ask yourself, to what extent, particularly in the context of initiatives by Africa to unite through trade, for example, under the auspices of the African Continental Free Trade Area, you want to ask, to what extent is it in Africa's interest to continue with these relationships, particularly where they could undermine efforts of African states to come together to unite more and build their institutions, including their trade, so that there's more intra-Africa trade.
What should be done to liberate African continent from outsiders?
Two things that the African Union is already doing. So I suppose it's just a matter of time, and it's a matter of committing to those solutions and getting it done. So the two things would be, the one for me is better political unity, and which is why for me the idea of or the principle of learning different matters, because Africans have to care for Africans wherever they're found in the continent. And so if there are issues that arise in terms of conflict, for example, then Africans must be willing and ready and quickly come to the aid of their fellow citizens. And this is why the idea of African solutions to African problems becomes very key. So at a political level, that idea of African solutions to African problems is very, very important. We just have to ensure that it is implemented better than is happening at the moment. Number two is trade. And perhaps the most promising initiative that we've seen in Africa in decades is the African Continental Free Trade Area, because it will uplift Africans at the lowest levels it will ensure that Africans rise out of poverty through trade. So I see that particularly small, medium, and small scale enterprises stand to benefit a huge deal from the African Continental Free Trade Area, and that will help to lift Africans through all over the continent out of poverty.
The Westerners, they take African resource and they give back very little aid money. They are not making Africa capable of addressing its problem by its own. Why?
It is because Africa has not addressed the question of industrialization, for example, as sufficiently. If you look at Africa's exports, most of them are exported as raw materials and then brought back to Africa as finished products. And so Africa has to develop the capacity to process its own products. Africa has to industrialize. Africa has to discover its competitive advantages. It is the only way that Africa is going to be able to take advantage of its immense resources. And again, I emphasize, this is why, from my perspective, the African Continental Free Trade Area is a game changer, because it will help to address these issues, particularly if initiatives under the AUDA, the African Union Development Agency, the former NEPAD, particularly if initiatives at the AUDA to address questions such as infrastructure, enhancing the quality of Africa's infrastructure, enhancing the availability of electricity. If we resolve those issues, then certainly Africa will benefit even better from the new trade regime that the African Continental Free Trade Area offers.
What is the role of African leaders in doing so?
It is to lead. It is to champion the cause. It is to rally behind the people that they lead, to see the significance of the African Continental Free Trade Area. And it is to put resources that will ensure that the Continental Free Trade Area succeeds. And it is also to empower the Union so that it can make decisions that propel Africa.
Thank you. How can African people able to hold their leaders accountable for their scandals, iniquity, and irresponsibility?
The only way we do that is through elections. And fortunately, we have initiatives on the continent and an enabling framework that more and more is allowing the African citizenry to participate better in governance, not just in terms of electing leaders from one election to another, from a general election to another, but also between between elections. And so for me, the what is key here are institutions such as the African Governance Architecture Platform, the African Peer Review Mechanism, because then we are able to monitor on a day-to-day basis how we are doing in terms of improving our governance. But so Africa has to improve its governance. The people have to be better involved in how their countries are governed. And fortunately, now we have the tools to be able to do it within the AGA platform, within the APRM member states as well. And as you probably know, the APRM is also towards achieving universal accession, so that all member states of the African Union belong to the APRM, which is good in terms of enhancing the quality of governance across the member states of the 54 member states of the African Union.
Pan-Africanism is all about unity and solidarity. What is expected from diasporas to be vital parts of economic, social, and political progress?
One, it is just recognizing the diaspora as part of Africa. This is why the African Union recognizes the diaspora as the fifth region, so to speak, of Africa. Fifth, in addition to East, West, South, and North, because that way, and giving them a seat at the decision-making table within the organs of the African Union, so that they can bring their resources, they can bring their ideas, and just get a sense of that they belong to the continent, so that we work together to uplift our people wherever they're found. My message is that I'm very optimistic. I consider myself a Pan-Africanist, and I've had the privilege of traveling the continent. I like the optimism of the African people. I like our resilience. I am very optimistic that as we move forward, particularly with what is going on now in terms of the African continental free trade area and improving governance. I've spent quite a bit of my life overseeing governance on the continent. Indeed, spent 3 years working for the African Peer Review Mechanism. And what I've seen gives me hope that if we continue on this path, it will not be easy. There are a few steps back sometimes. But I think if you compare Africa today to 2 or so decades ago, we are doing much better. So I'm increasingly optimistic that we will be governed in a better way, and that the African continental free trade area will help to bring development to the continent.
Professor, thank you for having time with us.
Thank you very much, Jason. My pleasure.
Dear viewers, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.